Okay, I'm going to try and make use of having had to come out here today and talk about some of the work that I do. And I intentionally began with my dog there on the yarrow lawn, kind of to show that although dogs running around, tearing around, there's very few grasses, lawns that don't get divots in them. Fescue even gets divots in them. But you can have, this is perfectly a yarrow lawn, which you're predominantly seeing California native Achillea milliforma, the native yarrow species, yarrow for those of you who are from the East Coast, I think that's how they say it. That this is fine. You can use this as you would any lawn space, and it is absolutely drought tolerant. It needs you can leave it long. This is not all that long, and it's luscious to lay in. Or you can mow it. Right now, what you're looking at is the competition of two native grasses that provide good weed resistance because they form thick mats that resist anything growing up through them. Then most of the weeds that the one species is native bent grass, Agrostis palens, which I seeded when I did this as a project with the turf replacement for the drought through the water company. When I did this for this client, so it was a documented process of what was I removing, and those photographs exist, and what was I putting in that would be far more effective for living in this area in the drought. So we removed the very, very water thirsty fescue. And then seeded with Agrostis palens, native bentgrass, which some still is now I can't really show you. It would look more like this, although this is very probably, yeah, that probably is, looking at it a little closer, that probably is Agrostis palens, as opposed to, yeah, that is the native bentgrass, and this is Festuca rubra. These are all native grasses. So the lush, long-haired look of the Festuca rubra, but that it only really primarily does well in shade, and also doesn't really take foot traffic. The Agrostis palens was marketed by S&S Seeds as a lawn alternative that you could do from seed that could take foot traffic, could take mowing, could take drought conditions, that would stay green in summer months, although it is a winter grass. And that was the question, that, a lot of these things go dormant. Native plants know what climate they're dealing with. They don't try and live when the circumstances don't support them living, unlike the fescue, which can't live without being supported all the time. The native grasses can live quite well, according to millennium of seed selection, genetic selection, to live in the environment that they developed in. So Agrostis palens is a winter grass. It comes to life in the winter, and then goes dormant in the summer when there's no rain. In Southern California, that is the weather pattern. And lo and behold, even with watering, which we didn't really want to do much of, even with watering, come summer, the first summer after this lawn replacement project, when the client is wanting to be on his lawn with his friends, sitting in lawn chairs, watching movies on this outdoor movie screen, which is the wall of his garage, it was dormant, and it was dirt and weeds. And so I very, very quickly tried to address that for, you know, the purposes of how we need to enjoy our gardens outside in the summer more than in the winter when that bent grass can grow with no care. And that's when I reseeded with Achillea milliforma, native grass that thrives. It is part of the reason I chose it is it was 105. We were record-breaking heat, and yet there it was in nature, and wherever seed had blown, Achillea milliforma, bright green and soft and supple, with no care, zero assistance. So that was, you know, that commended it to me as what would I want to put here. So here it is again, and so it's really pleasant. It smells good. It feels good to lay on it when it's thick. It can be mowed. So if you really want that mowed, manicured look of a lawn, you can use Achillea milliforma, native California yarrow to get that look without the heavy cost of watering and the maintenance. It doesn't grow as fast as an exotic grass introduced as is fescue for most of the typical grasses that are seeded that we have for lawn or sodded. You can't do bent grass from sod, some things. So this was seeded, and this was an experiment from seed, and I really enjoy working with native seed I see, or even edible seed. I really like just working with the planet the way it was designed. You know, how do you maintain the environment? How does it maintain itself? And predominantly, you know, I mean, how does it propagate itself and how does it maintain itself? So this particular grass, bent grass, Agrostis valens, and Achillea milliforma, native California yarrow, these do well from seed, and this is an example of that. And they now you will see that I'm trying to get my shadow out of here. That I mean, initially, so there is this clover thing that is coming up. That's actually a tidy tip that's seeded there, and that's what was problematic for this particular lawn space was the invasive weeds. And so from a standpoint of what plant to use for a lawn so that you're not having to, that can fight the weeds, this was a really good choice and has been very effective from the standpoint of it puts both. The reason you're not seeing the native bent grass is wherever you see it over in that lush thick path where I did not seed with the yarrow. The yarrow may seed itself there, but I didn't put the yarrow there. I was only concerned about the area that people were going to be in, not be weeds and dirt. So I seeded initially, you know, the patch where the Agrostis valens had gone dormant. And so the Achillea milliforma beat out the native bent grass, but the bent grass is still underneath fighting to erupt through the through the yarrow. And so we've got two mats against weed seed that is beneath the lawn surface. The problem with the weeds is, and this is why I just, you know, I will go over and over and over again why it is not cost effective for people who want, agencies, people. If you let weeds go to seed, so they are able to travel through being carried by humans and animals and the air, you can't fight the weeds. You can, this is very effective, this fight from the ground, this native plant claiming the ground, but it can't fight where the seed comes in from the air and lands on top, and then is opportunistic, finding barren spots where it then begins to take hold and it then begins to spread. So that's why I still am doing, you know, very labor intensive. Here's a very bad patch of this clover, and I've shown you the yards in the neighborhood that are the sources of this prolific amounts of weed seed that can get carried into intentionally maintained yards. And I haven't shown, but I mean, it's certainly not just this yard. They get into everybody's intentionally maintained because they come from the surface and they are opportunistic. Once they, just like cancer, I mean, once they find a weak spot and they start growing in it, they spread out from there. So, now, this is an intentional native meadow, which we used to have. I've covered this up there in the national park area, the state park area, of seeing the invasive species. Disheartening, because it should be a native California meadow, and our grasses, our native California meadows, were very beautiful. There's very few places where they remain naturally in huge swaths in nature from the spread of invasive seed, which I've covered that in other segments, particularly tumbleweed, Russian thistle, and foxtail. Now when you're seeing green in the spring, you're not seeing native California meadows, you're seeing invasive species that are very destructive to the environment and extremely flammable. Whereas the native grasses really know how to live here, require far less care or water or attention. And so I did this as and that is one of being a sustainable garden artist. Native meadows are beautiful, they're healthier for the environment, and they're very nice spaces for people to be in, as opposed to the weeds. So I've covered now the Agrostis palens as it's long and lush. It can be mowed, it can be short and cover a whole area. The Festuca rubra malate, which is also lush, and the native yarrow, and the other that I introduced quite specifically in the original design presentation for this project that was paid for by the Replace Your Lawn because of the drought tolerance by the Water District. The other I intentionally introduced as a border in a larger quantity is this that you're seeing seeded up. This is Carex panza, which I don't know that there's which is not a grass, it's a sedge, but it is a very effective, often used lawn substitute, drought tolerant, mowable, can take foot traffic. So those are the main grasses of the meadow space, and then I bordered the entire meadow as it would be with other grasses, mounding grasses. There's deergrass, Muhlenbergia rigans, Buddleia. There's also rushes. The iris there is not a grass, but and not a native, but the blue-eyed grass it is and is very effective, and very tough and strong. The horsetail is native. This is native grass. This area was seeded on the perimeter. It is planted again with seed. Now I didn't do the Muhlenbergia rigans from seed, which is my preference, to do whatever I can from seed or to start seed in pots and transplant. There's another Muhlenbergia rigans. So the border is all a demonstration of what you would have found before the invasives took over in a native California meadow space, Southern California, yes, even desert areas. That we had some lush, lovely meadow spaces in the foothills of the eastern Sierras, just as you enter Death Valley, the desert. So I think that I've hopefully covered and done not too bad of it, a job of actually physically showing you some of the beauty of these plants and giving you the names of them and knowing how effectively they can be used. Those are also native grasses and rushes, reeds, and the perimeter of this native meadow is alternatively, for the most part, it is edibles in an intentional space, which was an allowable lawn substitute replacement, that it could be replaced as edible space as opposed to lawn space, for the purposes of trying to diminish water use. Yes, you water them, but you also get something from, you get food. So I did, and then also I did do, so most of it is edibles or natives. I did in some, I did do some plantings of it. So there's the Ceanothus Yankees Point, herbs, edible. So some, this is a curry plant, another native grass, which I can't recall the name of, thyme, so herbs, which are edible, citrus, edible, vegetables, which are edible. The Swiss chard grows as naturally in this environment. It's an edible that grows naturally in this environment, with very, very, very little care. It's highly nutritious. The rhubarb is beautiful, and I planted it because it's a favorite of the client. But you are actually seeing those rhubarb stems turn red, as rhubarb should, as an edible. Strawberry rhubarb part, there's strawberries planted next to the rhubarb. But I was told by another grower, I asked, why am I not getting my nice red rhubarbs? And he said, we don't get enough cold, so you will get the stems rarely being as brilliant red. So cold triggers that chemical process that turns them red. And I don't know the difference in the taste if we would harvest and cook with the green stalks. So let me see, and then okay, so there is a lavender plant here that is Mediterranean, and Mediterranean plants have traditionally been used here and done well. But again, that's an herb, it's an aromatic. This is used in cooking, lemongrass. It does beautiful when you let it go to seed. It has a, I mean, if you need that that plume look, and this is an edible plant, then lemongrass is, most people don't let it just go to seed and put out these feathery stalks, but it's a beautiful plant when it's seeded up. And then I can't remember the name of this brightly flowering, which is not a native. I put that in because at one point I was really needing to attract pollinators, and nothing native, it was at a time when there was nothing native that I could find to use in the space. I have tried to increase the number of flowering native pollen attractors, but we were having trouble getting our squashes pollinated, and I needed to bring more pollinators into the yard, so I chose something that was already attractive to the pollinators, and planted that. So I think that hopefully I have presented something that is encouraging of what is possible to live in balance with nature, attending to nature, using the land as it knows very well how to be used in a healthy way by humans and animals both. And the little Johnny Jump Up, again introduced by seed, viola. The flower is edible, used in high dollar catering, on high dollar items like chocolate-covered strawberries for garnish, basil doing quite well in a microclimate, onions, obviously lettuces. And again, to me, the point is you plant with the intention of many, many benefits for what you do. Not just, oh, I like that, that's pretty, I want to put that in my garden. And you don't have any context of knowing whether it can survive there, whether it's going to bring problems there. Is to plant with greater intention for the whole environment to remain healthy for every living thing there, the plants, the animals, the people, and then that mitigates some of the impact, our destructive impact as humans when we come into an environment and we manipulate it piecemeal because we want this, we like that, and we're not thinking about the consequences down the line, and that's why we have global warming, quite frankly. So on that note, I'm going to sign off.